his time period has been marked, if you can notice on the screen, 272/268 till 232 BC. Now, why this slash is there is because after the death of his father, there was a war of succession going on between him and his brothers. He had a number of other brothers who also wanted to sit on the throne of the kingdom. But this war of succession was there for almost 4 years. So historians, there are two sets of historians. One set of historians claim that 268 BC was the time period when he ascended the throne, and one set of historians claim that 272 BC was the time period for his accession to the throne. So there are two sets of historians. So that way, there are two dates which can be written with a slash, that depending on which set of historian wanted to take up with which date. Now we move to the origin of Chandragupta Maurya. Now Chandragupta Maurya, we should all know, did not belong to the Kshatriya clan, whereas the trend in those days was that only the Kshatriyas were eligible to sit on the throne of a kingdom, or they could be the rulers. Whereas Chandragupta Maurya was one such exception who did not belong to the Kshatriya clan. So historians claim that he belonged to a Maurya clan and a Vaisya caste. He was basically, people say that he belonged to the category where there were families of herdsmen. During the time when Chandragupta Maurya existed, there was a time when people had a lot of wealth, but there was a lot of violence also going on. People used to indulge in a lot of violent activities. So the Mauryan Empire in Indian history originated from the Magad Empire, which was already established in the Indo-Gangetic plains. And olden times, it was a capital city, Patliputra, which is now near the modern Patna area. The great rulers of the Mauryan dynasty were Chandragupta Maurya, Bindusar, and Ashoka. Like I told you, Chandragupta Maurya rose in life from a very humble background. He was from the Maurya tribe and the Vaisya caste, but he organized a very powerful army and laid the foundation of a very strong empire. So much so that he also overthrew the Nandas who were existing in the Magad area, and the Greeks were in the northwestern frontier province, because before this time period, Alexander the Great had come to India. He had set his foot, and once he returned back to his land, he left behind a trail of Greeks who settled in India. That is why we also have the culture which is known as the Indo-Greek culture, because we were influenced a lot by the Greek culture. So Chandragupta Maurya was also responsible for overthrowing the Greeks, and that way he unified the entire northern India. He also defeated the Persian general Seleucus, and in fact he entered into a matrimonial alliance with the Persians and the Greeks, because he adopted this policy of expansion through friendly relationships also. Chandragupta Maurya divided his empire into provinces because he was one great administrator who believed that the administration should be done in a very efficient manner. And since he had a very large empire to look into, he divided it into provinces, and those provinces were put under the governance of certain important officials, where the law was enforced and there were assessment for taxes also. One peculiarity which is not generally mentioned in the textbook is, which I wanted to just bring it to your notice, was that Chandragupta Maurya, since he did not belong to the Kshatriya clan, he always feared assassination, because he always felt that he would be assassinated. And for that, he had a chain of food tasters. You understand who are food tasters? People who taste food officially. Okay, like we have tea tasters and coffee tasters, that's an occupation or a profession. Similarly, we have some food tasters, and he had appointed certain food tasters that every meal which he consumed during that day, Aditya, you can look straight. During the day, he had made people taste that food. And so much so that he also used to sleep in different rooms. He never slept in one room for more than 2 days. So this was a fear of assassination which was always lurking in his mind, that somebody would come and kill me. So for that, he had adopted these kind of policies. He ruled very efficiently, and towards the end of his career, he gave up his throne and then he adopted Jainism. So he became a monk after leading the life as a very successful establisher of the Mauryan Empire. Okay, before we go to the sources, let me just give you information that how Chandragupta Maurya was made to sit on the throne of the Mauryan dynasty was that one day he was just playing around when during his childhood, he was playing around on a heap of, there was a mound where he was playing along with his friends as he belonged to the herdsman category, and there were sheep uh, where he was sitting. So he was playing with his friends, and there Chanakya, that is Kautilya, happened to be around, and he saw that this boy was playing a game. He was conducting a mock session of a courtroom where he assumed the title of the king, and he had all the people, that is his friends around him, as his subjects, and he was trying to give impart justice to the people. So this activity of his made Chanakya or Kautilya realize that this is one child who has a lot of potential to grow up. And since Kautilya was also wanting to have somebody who could overthrow the Nandas in the years to come, he tapped the potential of Chandragupta Maurya. He took him under his patronage, and he trained and groomed him to become a very successful king. So that is how the origin of Chandragupta Maurya came for the Mauryan dynasty. Now, whenever we read about anything in history, we always go back to sources. We have to only depend on sources, like we've already discussed. Sources are generally literary or archaeological sources, depending on which time period you have existing. So for the Mauryan dynasty, we have sources from the literary as well as from the archaeological sections also. More important one, the literary ones, which we will be discussing now. So the sources are divided into two categories, literary and archaeological. Literary is something which can be read, something which was written and can be read, and archaeological is the tangible source which can be felt. See, there are also sources like tangible and intangible. I hope you all understand these terms, tangible and intangible. Tangible is something which can be seen, heard, and felt, and intangible, like for example, the archaeological source, the literary source. And intangible is something which you can feel in the sense as a feeling, not basically go and touch it, but and you can also make it a part of your life. For example, the culture. So whatever is our culture, whatever are our values, those become part of intangible sources. So here we are discussing the tangible sources, literary and archaeological. Under literary sources, which give us information or which throw light on the Mauryan Empire, is the Arthashastra by Kautilya and Indica by Megasthenes. Under archaeological sources, we have the Ashokan edict, that is his rock edict, and the famous Sanchi Stupa. So I'm sure you all are aware of these important names of the sources. Sources further we divide literary into Indica and Arthashastra. First, we will deal with Arthashastra. Now, Arthashastra was a book which is written by Kautilya, or the other name of Chanakya. So before we move on to what the literary source was, I would just like to give you some information about Kautilya. Now, Kautilya's name has been taken from a group of scholars, Kautil. So he belonged to the Brahmin section and belonged to the learned faction of the society, and he was part of the scholars of the Kautilya group. So he was known as Kautilya or Chanakya. Now Chanakya was also the name of his father. So Chanakya was his family name, and his original name was Vishnugupta. Because he belonged to the clan of the scholars of the Kautilya group, he was also known as Kautilya. So people say that as per tradition, Kautilya or Chanakya was the prime minister and the advisor to the Mauryan kings like Chandragupta Maurya and his son Bindusar. Moving on to what Kautilya wrote was all about how things should be existing in a kingdom. So he wrote a book which was termed as Arthashastra, and this was a book on the political aspect and governance of the Mauryan Empire. The journal or this chronicle tells us how the economic situation was, what kind of political conditions were existing, were people being taxed, did people have enough money to sustain themselves, what kind of political scenes were existing, what were the occupations people were following. So all this information is compiled and put into this text, which is called as Arthashastra. Another very important source of information from the Mauryan point of view is Indica. Now, Indica was also a text which was written by Megasthenes. Megasthenes was ambassador from the Seleucus Nectar's kingdom, and he was in fact staying as an ambassador in Chandragupta Maurya's court. And during his tenure, that is tenure is the time period that he stayed in Chandragupta Maurya's court, he wrote about what the Mauryan Empire was all about, what kind of different caste systems were existing, and there was no slavery, which was the prevalence in those days. However, in the Chandragupta Mauryan Empire, slavery was not existing. So he focused on these aspects when he threw light about the Mauryan Empire in his book known as Indica. Though the original book which was written, or the original text which were written, the original forms are not there, but they have survived in form of quotations which people have collated and taken from the work of the classical Greek writers like Strabo, Arrian and Plutarch. So Indica was a contribution from Megasthenes, and Arthashastra was a contribution from Kautilya. These are very important sources from the Mauryan dynasty time period. Now, going back to what Arthashastra was all about, Kautilya mentioned 7 elements which were essential for a state. As to what are those important parameters which should be looked upon, or what are those important aspects which should be taken into consideration when we talk about a state and its governance. So the first thing that he emphasized on was on Swami. Now, Swami was somebody who was the king or who was the ruler. So he was the one who was responsible for the entire kingdom which was under him. Next part of the empire was the Janpad. Janpad word we have already done in our previous chapter. Jan means people and Pad means your foot, where you set foot on. So the Janpada was the area where people were existing. Amatya was the name given to the ministers who held important portfolios in the kingdom of the kings, and they helped the king in the efficient governance. Then comes the Dand, that is the sovereignty. Kosh is the treasury. Treasury is very important because from here only all the revenue is generated and the expenditure for the kingdom is conducted. Then Durg. Durg was in modern days, and Durg is in fact a Hindi word for fort. Fort you all have seen. Has anybody ever seen a fort? Physical form of fort? Yes. We do have forts in and around Pune also. And I hope you all understand the difference between a fort and a palace. A fort is an area which has walls around it. That is why we also use the word fortified. And generally forts have been built on hilltops for the defense and protection. So according to Kautilya, construction of forts was very important from defense point of view, so that the kingdom and the people residing in it could be defended in a very efficient manner. The 7th aspect of Arthashastra was Mitra. Mitra is friendship. So Mitra was emphasizing on the foreign relations that a king should establish so that his kingdom expands in a harmonious manner. It is not that you can develop relationships only through marriage. You can also have trade relations. You can also have other friendly relations. All these relations will only exist if you have the aspect of the Mitra existing in your sections of life. So Swami, Janpad, Amatya, Dand, Kosh, Durg and Mitra were important parts of the governance as far as Kautilya's Arthashastra was concerned. Then Kautilya moved to the qualities that a king should possess if we talk of ideal kingship. The king should have the quality of being fearless, and when the king is fearless, then he can be a conqueror, but he can only be a conqueror with the help of a powerful army. The king should also be able to win over all his enemies, and Kautilya said that, like we use the phrase like all is fair in love and war. Similarly, Kautilya was also of the opinion that we can employ any kind of fair or treacherous methods if we want to win the war. So we will go back to Kautilya's Arthashastra. So another feature which was there for Arthashastra was that it was written in Sanskrit. The language which was used was Sanskrit, and it was a comprehensive manual dealing with the rules of diplomacy, principles of administration, and the politics. This book, though it has been written in the time period of the Mauryans, it was only discovered in 1909. Kaustav, which year was the Arthashastra discovered? It was discovered in the year 1909, and now the English translation of the same is also available. Besides the Arthashastra and the Indica, we also have texts, that is Mudra Raksh and the Buddhist literature. So this is just to give you extra information. The Mudra Raksh also discusses how Chandragupta Maurya defeated the Nandas with the help of Chanakya, of course. And the Buddhist literature, like the Jataka tales. If you remember, we had done Jataka tales in the previous lesson. Jataka tales were also sources of information for the Buddhist texts. Yes, for Buddhism, Jataka tales gives us information. So here also the Buddhist texts like the Jataka tale used to reveal what kind of social economic aspects were existing in the society during the modern time period. And Divyavadam is a Tibetan Buddhist text which informs us about Ashoka's effort. So along with the Arthashastra and the Indica, the Mudra Raksha and the Buddhist literature were also responsible for spreading information about the Mauryan dynasty. So Megasthenes was a Greek traveler with his book Indica. He lived in Patliputra and he emphasized on aspects like how the army was organized, what kind of administrative setup was existing in Patliputra, the economy and customs and religion of the people. Besides the literary sources, we also have archaeological sources, which were the Ashokan Edict and the Sanchi Stupa. So the Ashokan edicts were in form of rock edicts, pillar edicts, and cave inscriptions, which have been deciphered uh, by James Prinsep in 1837. And the majority of these edicts were basically proclamations to the public. That is what Ashoka used to tell the people about their acceptance of Buddhism, how they should follow the principles of Buddhism, and how they can go about improving their lifestyles if they follow what Buddhism preaches. Also, the code of conduct, the moral values, all these were part of the edicts. Now, edicts were basically inscriptions which were made on the rocks and on pillars throughout the kingdom of the Mauryans, and they ensured that everybody was able to read them, and based on that, if you have something which is in front of you on a daily basis, then you imbibe all those things as values and it becomes a part of your lifestyle. So the Ashokan edicts were of great importance. Now, what is an edict? An edict is basically a decree. It is basically a kind of a law or a policy which is issued by the king or a sovereign. And these edicts were an important source of Mauryan history. They are the oldest and best preserved records of India. And these edicts are inscribed on the rocks and pillars throughout the country, which include 14 major rock edicts and 7 pillar rock edicts. Now, these inscriptions basically give us information about the life and ideals of Ashoka in particular and about the Mauryan history. And we all know that out of all these Mauryans, Ashoka's reign was considered to be the most important one. So what his conquest was all about of Kalinga war, how he dealt with it, all these kind of information is given in the rock edicts of Ashoka. Another very important source of information, see, you can see here on the screen, this is the Pali on the Prakrit script which used to be engraved on these, and there were different kinds of edicts, and edicts have not only been found in India, but they have also been found in the areas which are now under Pakistan, in Nepal and Afghanistan. So the Buddhists spread their philosophy in different parts of the world as well. This is the famous Sanchi Stupa, one of the famous stupas. Out of all the stupas, we also have stupas at Amravati, but the Sanchi stupa is of great importance. As far as Buddhism is concerned, it is of great importance because the historians are of the opinion or of the view that the relics of Buddha, relics means the remains of Buddha, like his hair, few bones, his teeth, they are all inside this structure, which is this dome-shaped structure, and that is why it is a very revered place for the Buddhists. So the Sanchi Stupa is a semi-spherical solid dome-like structure, and it is made out of unburnt bricks. They have also used stones, and it has special significance because it represents the spiritual body of Buddha and also has his relics, like I told you, with hair and teeth or some bones. A casket containing these relics is placed at the base of the dome, and the foundation of this Sanchi Stupa was laid by Ashoka. It was built in the 3rd century BC. It has 4 gateways. Now, 4 gateways are made basically because we all know that there are 4 cardinal directions. So people could come from all the 4 directions, and the only thing was that they had to enter into the gates, and they had to indulge in pradakshina of the 4 from the 4 gateways for the tomb. These gateways have been carved, and they have original stories which have been taken in from the Jataka tales. There is a pillar which represents the sculptures of the lions, and the Buddha is represented in symbols like the people tree, lotus, and a wheel. Now, Buddhists believe in these kind of symbols, a people tree. So, whenever, if for Buddhism, you will see a picture of a people tree or a lotus or a wheel, it represents Buddha in his non-human form. This means these are basically symbols which represent Buddha. So wherever in any Buddhist text or in anything to do with Buddhism, these symbols are found, we can understand that these are associated with Buddha. So Sanchi Stupa had 4 gateways on all 4 sides, and every symbol in the structure denotes some kind of a meaning or story from Buddha's life. Buddha has been represented in a symbolic form, like I told you, the lotus, wheel, or thrown under the people tree. And when we look at the architectural style of the Sanchi Stupa, we come to know that the skills which people indulged in were very, very high and very technically qualified skills which people had in those days.